Men and women are not equal. So, what do I mean by that? Well, I'm talking about incidents of sexual trauma, specifically sexual abuse in childhood. So, I just did a little research. I asked ChatGPT, what is the incidence of sexual abuse between boys and girls in the United States? And ChatGPT says the incidence is 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys. Now, whether I believe that, kind of the rule of thumb that I always heard in my training and in my early experience clinically was that it was 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys, which to me sounds more intuitively correct. But even if you go with ChatGPT is essentially saying that the incidence of sexual abuse is 3 times as much for girls as for boys. And even if it's 2 times or 3 times, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is that there's many more girls who are sexually abused in our society than there are boys. And I think that's unquestionable. One of the reasons that ChatGPT may be coming up with such a low incidence for boys, 1 in 13, is reporting. There may be less reporting in these surveys that ask men, were you abused as a child? Excuse me, a man may not want to say, yes, I was sexually abused. Yes, my uncle sexually abused me. Yes, my neighbor sexually abused me. A man may not want to say that. So there's reporting issues of whether men are really accurately answering the surveys correctly. But I think it goes without question that more girls are sexually abused than boys. So what does that mean? Well, as an adult functioning in our society, it means that the women that you are dating, or your wife, if you're a man, in a heterosexual relationship, it means that there's a much higher likelihood that the woman you are dating, that the women in your family, your sister, your mother, your grandmother, the people around you, your female coworkers, there's a much higher incidence of sexual abuse among girls. So needless to say, many more women in your life are going to have gone through that trauma. So what is the effect of trauma? Well, trauma can be compromising. If it is not treated, it can be toxic. It can limit you in your functioning. It can limit you in your relationships. It can limit you in your success, in a career, in whatever endeavor you're trying to achieve. It can affect you. It can limit you. It can compromise you. So yes, there is treatment for trauma. There's EMDR. There's somatic experiencing. There's talk therapy. There's lots of different ways that people can get treatment for trauma. But what I'm saying is that we're not starting with a level playing field. So the women in our society, in the United States and probably in many other industrialized countries, and maybe in many developing countries, it's not my area of expertise, but I would say intuitively that around the world, you are living in a society, in a global society where women have a much higher incidence of sexual abuse, and it compromises their functioning across the board. So what does that mean? As a man, it means that you need to be understanding, and that when we all try to be equal in our relationships and it's 50-50 and everything else, no, it's not 50-50. It's never 50-50. I mean, you might contribute the same amount to your shared bank account as your wife or your girlfriend or whatever, but it doesn't mean that you're on a level playing field. You have to understand that the women in your life, the women around you in this world, are dealing with a different level of intensity than we are as men, because they have been more traumatized than we have. They have been more affected by the trauma in their lives than we have, because it happens to them at least twice as much as it does to us. And I'm just talking about sexual abuse right now. There's, maybe boys have more physical abuse that they receive than girls. Well, I mean, that's for another video. But let's just talk about on this one level that there's certainly a greater degree of harm, of toxic imprinting on girls and women in our society because of the amount of sexual abuse that they experience. So this means that as men, we need to be more compassionate, we need to be more understanding, we need to be more sensitive, and we need to understand what the women in our lives have gone through, especially if they have had intense traumatic experiences as children, sexual abuse, okay? So all I'm trying to say is that, if you're saying that a man shows up at a job interview and a woman shows up at a job interview and they're on an equal playing field because the employer is not discriminating against sex in their hiring, so we're all on an equal playing field. Well, if that woman is dealing with trauma, she may perform differently in her interview. She may perform differently in her job performance. So I'm just saying that this doesn't have to be, because it's a diagnosis of trauma, it doesn't mean it's a destiny. People can get help. I encourage anybody who's gone through a traumatic event or a series of chronic events to get treatment, to get help, to heal. And as men in the lives of the women around us, we can support them in their healing by listening, by hearing their stories, by being sensitive, by encouraging them to get help. And if we've gone through sexual trauma or physical trauma or any kind of trauma as men in this world, we need to get help too, because we're walking around in a world, the statistic I heard recently is 60 to 100% of people are dealing with trauma. Okay, and it's probably closer to 100 than it is to 60 in my mind as a clinician. So I would say if we're walking around in a world of traumatized people, people need to get help. People need to get support. People need to get healing so we can function as mature adults in this world, and we're not leaning on addictive crutches, okay? And we're not leaning on dysfunctional behaviors. And we're going through this world, fully in our power and not compromised by the events that have held us back in our lives. So I just wanted to share this about equality, gender equality as a result of sexual abuse. No, there is no gendered equality because of the incidence of sexual abuse in our culture and probably in our world. And that is what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you. Please subscribe and like the video.